This lecture is about ethics, academic freedom, and politics. I will introduce the guiding principles, speak about the academic mission, what might compromise academic freedom, the threat of commercialization, and lastly, freedom of extramural expression. I've mentioned the relationship between academic freedom and freedom of expression. I said that it's constricted to academic setting, whereas freedom of expression is a right that everyone has, whether you're in academia or outside of academia. Academic freedom is about the ability to inquire. It's about freedom of association. It's about freedom of publication. The term itself, academic freedom, has traditionally two applications. It applies to what teachers, professors have, and the freedom of students. Questions that occupy the mind are the following. Can an academic teach everything? What kinds of pressures do academics face nowadays? To what extent current trends regarding commercialization of research undermine fundamental academic principles such as academic freedom, integrity in research, openness, and serving the public interest? Are there any limits on freedom of extramural expression? In order to answer these questions, let me start by setting the ground rules. What should be the guiding principles for conversation in order to try to answer these difficult questions? Well, first of all, conscience is important. People should be true to themselves, able to express their minds, notwithstanding what other people are thinking about their own views. Secondly, people seek the truth. We all want to live in a true world. No one would like to live in a lie. And we should be able to pursue the truth, our truth, the world truth, to the best of our abilities. John Stuart Mill was not the first to articulate these ideas. John Milton preceded him hundreds of years before. But Mill certainly articulated truth principle in the most complete way. He spoke of the idea that people should be able to search for the truth, should be able to articulate their own minds, to develop themselves. He also spoke about the fact that oftentimes truth is not something that is wholly in our hands, but it is amalgamation of truisms. So it might be the case that I have part of the truth, or you have another part of the truth. And if we clash this truth together, we get something that is of more substance. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And according to this principle, John Stuart Mill told us that we should contest all truisms, even Isaac Newton. And we know that some people paid a very high price because they were determined to pursue the truth. One example is Galileo Galilei, of course, who was in prison because he had the audacity to challenge the most powerful institution of the time, the Pope, the Church. We all should take responsibility for action, and of course, academics are not exempted. Responsibility is about having a foresight, having some sort of a vision, knowing what you're doing, calculating what you're doing, making sure that you are not going to cause any harm. So like a good chess player, you are looking for the options, what your conduct entails, what will be the end result of what you're doing. People should be accountable for what they're doing. Transparency and honesty. So we should work in a setting that is open. We should be true to ourselves and to our colleagues. And we should be aware and alert others if there are any compromising factors and interests that might undermine what we are doing. We should try to maintain our independence so we are free to speak out our minds, even if other people don't like what we're saying. And we should be professional. We should be doing our job in the best way we can. That should be aspiration. And let me say some more about professionalism, because we do expect certain standards to be met, because it is an academic setting. And we as lecturers, we have certain expectations, and students have certain expectations from their professors. The function of academic freedom is not to liberate individual professors from all forms of institutional regulation, because we need to have some sort of regulation, but instead is to ensure that faculty within the university, professors, are free to engage in professionally competent forms of inquiry and teaching, which are necessary for the realization of the social purposes of the university. Academics are professional experts in the production of knowledge. Thus, they cannot teach, for instance, something that we know it's obsolete, altruism that have been refuted, say the flat earth theory, and other falsehoods in an academic setting. Today, if you come to a scientific class, and a professor starts telling our students that the earth is flat, the students, rightly so, are going to demand their money back. Why are you teaching this? Unless you're talking about, classes about history of science or about conspiracy theories, then this might be relevant, but not in a scientific class today that speaks about state-of-the-art science. Context, of course, is very, very important. If you heard about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is arguably the most anti-Semitic tract of all time, that depicted a vision that the Jews control the world, that there's some sort of a small group of Jews who plan ahead which state are going to conquer next, which bank they are going to take over next, which media organization they are going to manipulate next, and they orchestrate the worlds in according to Jewish interest, as if there's such a thing as a Jewish interest. Now, if you teach the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the context of anti-Semitism, in the context of teaching hate and bigotry and the harm of hate and what racism and anti-Semitism may entail, teaching in that kind of context of teaching racism is fine. But if you are teaching this kind of stuff in the course of Jewish civilization or religion or Judaism, then of course what you're doing is just promoting more hatred. So context is very important. What do you teach? What's the relevance of what you teach to the context that you are teaching? Professionalism also is about organizing institutions of peer review and faculty self-regulation on the basis of professional skepticism, professional norms, professional standards that we all would like to maintain. Now, you didn't expect me to do this now, did you? Or to do this? You expect me to work well with PowerPoint by now, and if I do this back and forth and take time for me to explain something, and the slides are empty and they don't advance, then you might say I'm not very professional. And you'll be right in saying that. There are certain standards that we should maintain, and we should do our homework before we teach. We should do our homework before we come to class. If we don't do that, that means that we are not really true professionals. And professionalism is something that we all would like to adhere to. It's something very, very important. So these should be the guiding principles. What might undermine these important principles? Well, first, businesses and money. Money corrupts. And if there is an interest, say, pharmaceutical company that's has high stake in new medication, and would like to push it forward and ask you to do some sort of experiment to ensure and to verify that this medication is good, is going to work. The company may have a patent over this and can make millions, if not billions of dollars as a result. And you, in your results in your lab, you see different outcomes than the one that the business expected you to show them. This is enormous pressure. And if you'd like to continue to be funded by the same company, you might compromise your own professionalism, your own conscience, and you might twist the facts and give them what they want to hear rather than what you found. This pressure of money and businesses is something that is of growing concern in academia nowadays. Besides the pressure of money and businesses, there are all kinds of other pressures that we should be cognizant of. For me, as a professor, there's pressure of my line manager, of my supervisor, and I have many supervisors to bring certain outcomes, certain things. There's the pressure of my peers that I'll be up to certain standards, that I will show certain quality, that I'll be competitive, that I'll bring forward new ideas. There's the pressure of donors who bring money to the university, and they may have all kinds of expectation. There's the pressure of politicians provide or produce more impact research, more relevant to society. So do away with humanities, do away with things that are not really important, according to some politicians, for the livelihood of society. Be practical. And then there's the pressure of social conformity. There are some issues that are problematic, that are controversial. Oh, stay away from them. Don't rock the boat. To tell us what we want to hear, not those things that we do not want to hear or that we dread to hear. So conform to the standards. These are real pressures that we should be aware of. An example of undermining academic freedom, personal story. I was visiting professor at UCLA at the School of Law, and I taught medical ethics at the School of Law. Abortion and the right to die, euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. And one of the issues that I covered in the course was the conduct of this gentleman, Jack Kevorkian, who was known at that time to be Dr. Death. He, as a physician, he went out and he helped people who wanted to die. He assisted their death. And sometimes the assistance was not only to provide them with the means to die, but sometimes he was the one who pressed buttons, who transfused poison into their veins. He himself killed people. And when there was evidence that he was doing this, and there was no law permitting euthanasia at that time in the United States, he was put in prison. And at the time that I was teaching at UCLA, he was already in prison after he killed some dozens of people. And I said one of the issues that I covered was the issue of assisted suicide and euthanasia also in the United States. And one or two of the readings concern Jack Kevorkian himself. And I did not give them reading about Jack Kevorkian. I always believe in primary source. So I let him read Jack Kevorkian himself. Jack Kevorkian published a book. So my students had to read 2 chapters, I think, from the book. And then one day before the course started, I received a phone call from a person who represented himself as an assistant to Jack Kevorkian. And he said that Kevorkian would like to know my views about end of life, about physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And my answer was that Mr. Kevorkian, Dr. Kevorkian, should be pleased that I'm teaching him and I'm teaching his own voice, I'm teaching his own book. That was not enough for Dr. Kevorkian, because there was another phone call in which he insisted, thank you very much for teaching me, but I want to know what are your views. And if you are against physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, then I would demand that you would not include my book in your readings. So this is a pressure, sort of a blackmail coming, the last moment, just a day or two before the start of the course. And in the United States, they do this hefty course books that includes all the readings of the course. That means that all these readings should be scrapped, and because you have to take out his readings as a result of his demand. So these kind of pressures, of course, are unacceptable. There are also issues that we should be aware of that happen in some countries that have to do with patronage. In some countries, it's almost impossible to receive a position in academia without some sort of patronage on the basis of merit alone. And there are camps. If there will be, say, 2 influential professors in the department, one would say to the other, you support my candidate in this position, I support your candidate in the next position. And people are not free to express their minds, because if they're free to go against the mood of those who are controlling the department, they will pay, and they will pay harshly. Another danger of compromising is, what do you do if a politician, esteemed politician, prime minister, contacts you and says, offer you, would you like to write my biography? Can you freely write a biography of someone who is still alive, who is powerful, who is paying you, who can influence your position in society? To what extent you are able to uncover the truth and tell it as you find it? Are there any conflict of interest? Are there any compromising effects? So we have to be conscious of real politics that may play a part in research, in academic settings. Another issue, if you research contemporary dictatorship, authoritarian regimes, to what extent are you free to speak your mind, uncover the truth, and speak up against those regimes if you know that you might pay a price? Especially if you're working in the government, under the government influence of these regimes. And sometimes also, if you're outside of those countries and then you would like to visit them, and you know that if you're going to speak up your mind against those governments, you won't be able to conduct your research in countries that are your specialty, because you are going to enter the blacklist of these countries. Here's another true story. Edward Ross, a professor who advocated in 1900 in the United States against slavery, against the importation of cheap Asian laborers. And one of the founders of the university, Stanford University, prestigious, well-known university, Mrs. Leland Stanford, who was a business lady, and her family employed cheap Asian labor. She wrote a letter to the president of Stanford, David Starr Jordan, and she said the following: "I must confess, I am weary of Professor Ross, and I think he ought not to be retained at Stanford University. I trust that before the close of this semester, Professor Ross will have received notice that he will not be re-engaged for the new year." And guess what David Starr did? The president of Stanford University wanted Miss Stanford to still be on the list of funders and benefactors of the university, fired Professor Ross. Some universities feel that they have a responsibility towards the socio-economic region they are located in, responsibility which may involve helping to enhance the region's economic development, not only by education but also in other ways. Many universities accept funding from industry and engage in commercial activities. Results of academic research, which not so long ago would have been made available in the public domain for other researchers to build on, are increasingly becoming the subjects of various kinds of intellectual property rights, particularly, but not only, in biomedical, chemical, and engineering fields. The increase in industry funding of academic research lead to the hampering of research, the skewing of research priorities, and the risk of conflicts of interest threatening the integrity of research. So, unfortunately, universities are becoming too business-like. The modus operandi is more like business than anything else, more than ever before. Admittedly, it could be argued that additional income for the universities makes them less dependent on governments. But an unhealthy dependence on industry may be more problematic in terms of potential threats to academic freedom. Universities like business. They compete with each other, they make money, and they use their patents against other universities. Here's a recent story that happened in the LSE. The LSE developed all kinds of relationship with authoritarian regimes. One was in Libya, under Gaddafi. And the son of Gaddafi was sent to study and to do his PhD at the LSE. And at the same time, there was a donation of 1.5 million that was made by the Gaddafi International Charity Development Foundations to fund programs of the LSE. Is there a conflict of interest here? Did Saif Gaddafi receive his doctorate? Was there anything that was not kosher in this kind of transaction? Well, I can tell you that there were allegations and real concerns about plagiarism of Gaddafi's PhD degree. There were concerns that he did not write it himself, and there were concerns that the University LSE gave him the PhD degree upon the pledge of receiving £1.5 million. The results of this affair, sorry affair, is that in March 2011, Howard Davis, who was the director of the London School of Economics, resigned, citing errors of judgment. And the LSE was criticized for accepting donations from and thus condoning the actions of Libya and its authoritarian dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. Let me say something about freedom of extramural expression, which refers to a professor's freedom to speak in public in her role as citizen in ways that are unrelated to professional expertise. So, of course, if you're a professional, you're a historian, and you are invited to speak about something within your field in history, that's one thing. But if you're a historian and then you're invited to speak about, say, cancer, then we can ask a question: why does an historian feel confident enough, professionally speaking, to speak about something that he is not really trained in? Or say, professor of chemistry who elects to speak about the war in Afghanistan. So he's holding the fact that he's a professor in a reputable university to get the platform to speak about something that is not within his field of profession. Is this okay or not okay? The issue for analysis is whether and how professors should be immune from sanction for such speech, even if it causes damage to the university that employs them. It is neither possible nor desirable to deprive a college professor of the political rights vouchsafed to every citizen. And I'll quote from the American Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure of 1940 that says, college and university teachers are citizens, members of a learned profession, and officers of an education institution. When they speak or write as citizens, they should be free from institutional censorship or discipline. But the special position in the community imposes special obligations on them. As scholars and educational officers, they should remember that the public may judge their profession and their institution by their utterances. Hence, they should at all times be accurate, should exercise appropriate restraint, should show respect for the opinions of others, and should make every effort to indicate that they are not speaking for the institution. This is very, very important. So there are public intellectuals who like to speak and can speak about a lot of things, a variety of things, but they should do it with responsibility, restraint, with a conscience. And you expect them to be true to what they're saying, and as professional, to invest in research, to invest in thinking, and to do something or to say something that is upon certain academic standards. Well, Professor Arthur Batts from the reputable Northwestern University, he uses the university credentials, the university server, to put on a blog under the server denying the Holocaust. And this is in violation of all the principles that I outlined above. And I should say that he was professor of chemistry, so the issue of Holocaust as a history, nothing that is concerned with whatever he does. He shook off special obligations. He was not accurate, and he acted without appropriate restraint, confusing between him and his institutions. And he used the university credentials, being the fact that he was a professor and the university server and all that comes with the university, in order to confer legitimacy on his ideas about Holocaust denial. University can and should insulate themselves from such a threat by categorically disclaim any responsibility for the extramural expression of their faculty. Thank you very much.